What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
In the quiet summer of 2004, Shelby Wright was just like any other 14-year-old kid in Snohomish, Washington, smart, curious, and obsessed with his computer. He was living with his great-grandmother on East Lowell Larimer Road, helping take care of her while attending summer school. He wasn't some troubled teen drifting between homes. He had responsibilities, structure, and a love for technology that anchored his days. But on July 26, 2004, everything changed. That day, Shelby was last seen at the home of Rob Wolf, a family friend who lived just a mile away on Cemetery Road in the Machias area. Shelby had often spent time at Wolf's house. It wasn't unusual for him to hang out there, maybe talk computers, or just get a break from caregiving. But something went very wrong that day, because Shelby never came home. He never made another phone call, never logged into another chat room, never saw another sunrise, and no one has seen him since. The first clue that something was truly wrong? His scooter was found abandoned outside Rob Wolf's house, the last place he was seen. But even more telling was what wasn't there: Shelby's laptop. The computer he cherished, the one he used to explore the online world, vanished with him. To this day, it's never been found. Back at his great-grandmother's house, nothing else was missing. His clothes, his belongings, everything remained untouched. It was as if Shelby had only stepped out for a few minutes and would be right back. But he never returned, and no one heard from him ever again. At first, authorities classified him as a runaway, despite there being no history of Shelby ever running away from home. His family and friends were adamant. This was completely out of character. He wasn't in trouble. He wasn't the type to disappear without a word. Still, his case sat idle for over 2 years under that assumption. Then, in January 2007, the classification was finally changed. Shelby was no longer just a runaway. He was now considered an endangered missing child. A year later, in April 2008, investigators publicly stated what many feared. They believed Shelby had been murdered. They conducted a search of Rob Wolf's property, the last place Shelby was seen alive. Rumors swirled about drug activity on the premises, and neighbors began to question what had really been going on at that house back in 2004. But when the search was over, nothing was found. No evidence. No laptop. No body. No closure. And no one, not one single person, has ever been charged in connection to Shelby Wright's disappearance. Rob Wolf, the man at the center of it all, always maintained his innocence. He denied knowing anything about what happened to Shelby. He has since passed away, taking with him whatever secrets might have died that summer. Today, Shelby's case remains open, but with each passing year, the hope of finding new evidence grows slimmer. His name still sits on missing persons databases. His face still lingers in age progression sketches, frozen in time. But the truth, the real truth about what happened on that mile-long stretch between two homes in Snohomish County remains buried. Who took Shelby Wright? What happened in that house on Cemetery Road? And will anyone ever step forward with the information needed to bring Shelby home? 14-year-old boys don't just vanish. Someone knows what happened. And until they come forward, this case will remain another unsolved tragedy. On October 30th, 2002, a quiet unease settled over a family in Bangladesh. Shenaz Zakiya, a vibrant and determined woman who had made a life for herself in Washington state, suddenly went silent. That final day in October was the last time her loved ones would ever hear from her. At the time of her disappearance, Shenaz was living in Tukwila, Washington, and working at a bank in nearby Seattle. She was building a life, not just for herself, but for her family as well. She had dreams of becoming a U.S. citizen and helping bring her loved ones from Bangladesh to join her in the land of opportunity. By all accounts, she was on the cusp of something better. But then, she vanished. What makes Shenaz's case especially chilling is what she left behind. Her home was untouched. Clothing still hung in her closet. Her hairbrush, her toothbrush, every personal belonging a person might need for a spontaneous trip or planned departure remained exactly where it should have been. Even critical legal paperwork, something no one would willingly abandon, was still in the house. Whatever happened to Shenaz, it didn't involve packing a bag and walking away. 1 week later, on November 7th, a glimmer of hope, or perhaps dread, surfaced. Her silver 2001 Lexus, license plate number 858 MCS, was discovered locked and abandoned in an industrial area of Tukwila. The location wasn't near her usual haunts or connected to her workplace. It sat in a commercial zone, quiet and unassuming, yet filled with questions. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of where she had gone or who might have left the car there. Just a locked vehicle, eerily still. But this story begins unraveling even further weeks before Shenaz was last seen. She had been married for 11 years to a taxi driver. They lived together in the 3000 block of South 154th Street in the Seattle-Tacoma area. And while their union may have appeared stable to the outside world, behind closed doors, Shenaz endured something far darker. On October 11th, just 19 days before she went missing, she made a call that would change everything. Shenaz dialed 911 to report that her husband had sexually assaulted her. In that call, she revealed what she'd been hiding for years, a life marked by abuse. Though it was the first time she officially reported it, she indicated it wasn't a one-time event. It had been ongoing. Enough was enough. Shenaz left the house and secured a temporary order of protection against her husband just 6 days later, on October 17th. She was actively pursuing a permanent protection order and was set to appear in court just 2 days after she vanished. But she never made it to that court date. Now here's where things become more unsettling. While Shenaz's husband hasn't officially been named a suspect, some of his statements raise serious red flags. He claimed he hadn't seen her since October 12th, the day after she reported the assault. But this timeline doesn't quite line up. A bank teller later told investigators that on October 30th, the very last day anyone heard from Shenaz, the couple showed up together at the bank. They allegedly wired $1,500 to Shenaz's family back in Bangladesh. That single transaction is the final breadcrumb on her trail. After that wire transfer, Shenaz disappeared completely. Her credit cards were never used again. Her cell phone, which she'd used daily, went silent. Not a single call, not a single text, nothing. To her family, her sudden disappearance was devastating. Shenaz had worked so hard for the life she was building in America. She had been in the country for 6 years and was finally seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. She was hopeful about her citizenship, determined to bring her family closer, and trying to escape an abusive marriage with dignity and strength. She didn't run away. She was taking steps to create safety for herself and those she loved. And just as she was reclaiming her life, she was gone. Police haven't officially stated that they believe a crime took place, but they've also said they don't believe Shenaz left of her own free will. That subtle distinction says a lot. Someone, somewhere, may know exactly what happened to her, and perhaps they've remained silent all these years. It's been over 2 decades now, 20 years of birthdays missed, 20 years without answers for a grieving family, 20 years without justice. What happened to Shenaz Zakiya? And more importantly, who wanted her silenced? It wasn't until mid-October that anyone even realized Frederick Yamamoto was missing. That detail alone says a lot about how quietly he lived. Frederick, a skilled photographer and musician, kept mostly to himself in his modest townhouse at the Park Lane complex in Bothell, Washington. He didn't have a bustling social life. He didn't reach out often. In fact, his family in California usually only heard from him once a year at Christmas time. So he disappeared sometime around September 29, 2009. There was no loud alarm, no missing person flyers, no immediate search. It wasn't until the apartment manager noticed his absence, weeks later in November, that concern finally began to build. When repeated knocks went unanswered and the mailbox began to overflow, the manager reached out to Frederick's family and finally contacted the police. Only then was he officially reported missing. But by that point, he had already been gone for nearly 2 months. A strange clue emerged early on. Frederick's car, a vehicle no one realized was even out of place, had been towed from a local park in nearby Kirkland on October 10th. It had been sitting for days at Denny Park, a quiet, wooded area with scenic access to Lake Washington. No one had seen him arrive. No one reported anything suspicious. It was just there. At the time the car was towed, police didn't know anything about Frederick being missing, so they didn't investigate. It wasn't until November 20th, nearly 6 weeks after the car was towed, that authorities finally searched the vehicle. Inside, they didn't find signs of violence. No blood, no struggle, no obvious evidence that a crime had taken place. But what they did find hinted at something deeply mysterious and potentially tragic. There was an empty carrying bag for an inflatable kayak. Red and gray. That was it. It led investigators to theorize that Frederick might have taken the kayak out on Lake Washington, perhaps on a solo trip that ended in disaster. But that theory was never confirmed. To this day, no kayak has ever been recovered. No paddle, no life jacket, nothing washed ashore, nothing found by marine patrols. Just a chilling possibility suspended in open water. As investigators looked deeper into his final days, they uncovered something strange. Frederick had a habit of paying his rent 3 months in advance, something he had done for years. But on September 28th, just a day before he was last seen, he handed his apartment manager a check for only 1 month's rent. When asked about it, he simply said, "That's all I have." It's a cryptic moment, one that raises even more questions. Was he having financial trouble? Was he in some kind of distress? Did he know, somehow, that he wouldn't be needing the apartment for much longer? Frederick Yamamoto's story is one that unravels slowly and leaves more questions than answers. Born and raised in Tokyo, Japan, he later moved to the U.S. and pursued a creative life. He graduated from the Brooks Institute of Photography in California and was known by his family as a quiet, thoughtful man who excelled at photography and played guitar with passion. He wasn't the type to seek the spotlight. He lived simply, alone, and that solitude, in many ways, allowed him to slip away unnoticed. What happened on Lake Washington, if anything, remains unknown. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he sought peace out on the water and met a tragic fate. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something darker. Something that left no trace. It's been over a decade since Frederick vanished, and not a single new clue has surfaced. No sightings. No remains. No answers. His kayak, his paddle, and any hope of closure drifts somewhere out of reach. What happened to Frederick Yamamoto? Did he walk into the water with the intent of returning, or was it always a one-way trip? Robert Weichel had a sharp eye for detail, the kind that only comes from years of working with your hands. As a retired sheet metal worker, he was no stranger to craftsmanship. But after retirement, he found a new passion, restoring classic cars. He wasn't just doing it for fun either. Robert had turned his hobby into a reliable side hustle, flipping vintage cars for a decent profit. That's what he was doing on the morning of February 21st, 1996. The 66-year-old left his home in King County, Washington, telling friends he was heading out to inspect a 1961 Ford Thunderbird, a sleek, stylish classic that perfectly matched his taste. He planned to purchase the car and likely had around $5,000 in cash on him. Carrying large sums of cash wasn't unusual for Robert. He didn't trust checks or credit cards. Cash was simple, direct, and part of how he did business. But Robert never came home. He never called. He never showed up to buy the car. And from that moment on, he was never seen again. Weeks passed before there was any real movement on the case. On March 11th, his 1989 Mercedes-Benz convertible coupe turned up at a park-and-ride lot in Burien, Washington, abandoned and collecting dust. The car was towed, and inside, authorities found Robert's wallet. But it was empty, no cash, no leads, just another red flag. 2 days later, on March 13th, a friend who had grown increasingly worried reported Robert missing. That friend had been caring for Robert's car in the past whenever he traveled, so when it turned up sitting alone at a park-and-ride for weeks, it sent alarm bells ringing. Something wasn't right. When detectives went to Robert's house, what they found only deepened the mystery. His luggage and clothing were still there. The kitchen was full of rotting food, as if he'd stepped out expecting to return in just a few hours. This wasn't a planned trip. Robert had vanished in the middle of his day, and he'd never packed a thing. Then came the break. Investigators learned that Robert hadn't been going to see the Thunderbird alone. He had been accompanied by Myron C. Wynn, also known by an alias, Myron Holdridge. Wynn was an acquaintance of Robert's and the person who told him about the Thunderbird for sale in the first place. He claimed they were going to see the car together. But after that, Robert was gone, and Wynn had vanished from the area. He didn't just lie low. He moved to Texas. For years, the case grew cold. Then in 1999, 3 years after Robert vanished, police recovered something unusual from a relative of Wynn's, a large diamond. That relative claimed they bought it from Wynn after he'd left Washington. Wynn had told a different story earlier, saying he'd found the diamond in the park and ride, the same lot where Robert's car had been discovered. That diamond, police believed, had once been part of a ring Robert wore on the day he disappeared. It took years, but in February 2009, Wynn was arrested in Texas and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors believed he had lured Robert out under false pretenses, taken him to a remote area, and killed him, all for the cash and the valuable diamond ring. The defense painted a different picture. Wynn's attorney claimed that the diamond wasn't Robert's and suggested that Robert had run off to Argentina. There was talk that Robert had once considered traveling there, and that maybe, just maybe, he'd left of his own free will. But his family didn't buy it. They described Robert as friendly and full of life, someone who looked younger than his age, who loved fishing, hunting, and talking to strangers. He wasn't the type to disappear, and if someone had tried to rob him, they believed he would have fought back. The first trial ended in a hung jury in December 2010. No verdict, no justice. But a second trial followed quickly in April 2011, and this time, the jury found Wynn guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Still, one piece remains missing. Robert Weichel's body has never been found. To this day, his loved ones have no place to mourn him. No grave, no final words, just an empty home, a towed car, and the eerie silence left behind when a man disappears in plain sight. It's the kind of case that rattles you, not because of the violence, but because of how easily someone with a full life, a big personality, and years of experience under his belt could simply vanish without a trace. What happened to Robert Weichel that February morning in 1996? Where did Myron Wynn take him? And why has no one, despite confessions, diamonds, and convictions, been able to bring him home? In the early morning hours of June 4th, 1989, a quiet street in Spokane, Washington, turned into the site of a haunting mystery, one that remains unsolved to this day. At 1:05 a.m., A young woman named Sandy Ferris spotted the limp body of a boy lying near the median of Thor Avenue, just a stone's throw from his home. His name was Russell Evans, a 13-year-old eighth grader with a kind heart, a promising future, and a passion for basketball. He was still alive, but just barely. As paramedics rushed to the scene, he clung to consciousness long enough to call out a single name over and over again. Brian. Help me. Brian. By 9:10 a.m., Russell Evans was pronounced dead. Police said he'd been struck by a car in a hit-and-run accident. Case closed, at least to them. But for Russell's family, friends, and a growing number of forensic experts and cold case followers, that explanation has never made sense. Over 3 decades later, disturbing inconsistencies in the evidence have pointed to a far darker and more deliberate truth. That Russell Evans may not have been the victim of a tragic accident, but rather of a brutal murder covered up under the guise of a hit-and-run. Russell was more than just another kid from Spokane. Born in July 1975, Russell was already 6 feet 3 inches at age 13, a towering presence, especially on the basketball court. He played guard for his school team and even attended an NBA youth training camp. But he wasn't just an athlete. He was also known for his loyalty, compassion, and sense of justice, a kid who stood up for his friends, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. He dreamed of playing in the NBA and later attending UCLA to study electrical engineering. His future was bright. He was close with his parents, John and Sue Evans, and had a sister, Diana, who adored him. But in a matter of minutes on that summer night in 1989, everything changed. That Saturday night, Russell was hanging out at Thornton Murphy Park with his close friend Aaron Abramson, and possibly others including Brian Bushing and Dawn Hepburn. It was the beginning of summer break, and kids were doing what they often did, meeting at the park, talking, and winding down the night. But the calm atmosphere quickly turned tense. 2 older boys, believed to be foster brothers aged 15 and 17, approached Dawn and began flirting with her. An argument erupted between Aaron and the older teens, escalating to the point where it nearly turned physical. Russell, ever the peacekeeper, stepped in to de-escalate the situation. According to witnesses, one of the foster brothers muttered something chilling before walking off. "We'll be back with our friends." Fearing retaliation, Russell and Aaron left the park and went to a nearby friend's house. They stayed there for a while, but around midnight, Russell told Aaron he was heading home. He called his dad at 12:05 a.m., saying he'd be home soon. He never made it. Shortly after midnight, Russell ran into his friend Sade, who would later be confirmed as the last person to see him alive. Around 12:15 a.m., another friend, Seth Matheson, saw him jogging north on Freya Street, just a few blocks from his house. And then, silence. Roughly 45 minutes later, at 1:05 a.m., Sandy Ferris saw what looked like a body in the road. She stopped and realized it was a boy, badly injured and barely breathing. She called 911. As she waited for the ambulance to arrive, she heard him repeatedly cry out one name, Brian. Even more disturbing, Sandy noticed a teenager dressed in white standing on a hill nearby, staring at them. When the sirens grew closer, the figure turned and ran off into the darkness, never to be seen again. When Russell's parents arrived at Sacred Heart Medical Center, hospital staff told them that someone named Brian had already called, asking about Russell's condition. This was before the hospital had even notified the family of their son's arrival. Police questioned Brian Bushing, one of Russell's friends. Initially, he told John Evans that he had been wearing white shorts and a white shirt that night, matching the description of the mysterious figure who fled the scene. But later, Brian changed his story, claiming he didn't own any white clothing and hadn't seen Russell that night at all. His father reportedly shut down further questions, and Brian was never pressed again. To this day, he has never explained the phone call or why Russell was calling out to him as he lay dying. The official police theory was simple. Russell was hit from behind by a speeding pickup truck and thrown over 75 feet by the impact. They claimed the force of the hit separated him from his shoes and left him lying near the median. But here's the problem. None of the physical evidence supports that version of events. 1. The shoes and blood pools. Russell's shoes and shoelaces were found 86 feet away, downhill from where his body was located. One off the shoelaces had blood on it, and strangely, the shoelaces had been pulled out of the shoes. 3 pools of blood were found 50 feet from the body. But if Russell had been struck and thrown, how did the blood end up so far away? 2. No tire marks. No skid marks. No debris. There were no tire impressions, no broken vehicle parts, and no evidence of a sudden stop or swerve. Police never located a vehicle, and no one came forward to confess. 3. Russell's injuries tell another story. A second autopsy performed by an independent forensic pathologist found evidence of a violent altercation before his death. Russell had bruises on his back and arms, consistent with being struck repeatedly with a blunt object, like a baseball bat or 2x4. Knuckle bruising suggested he tried to fight back. His kidney was lacerated and his spine broken, but he had no road rash, which would be expected if he'd been hurled across the asphalt. A cover-up or dismissed homicide. Russell's family was devastated, not only by his death, but by how quickly police dismissed any possibility of foul play. His parents, John and Sue Evans, hired private investigators, reconstructed the scene, and brought in independent forensic experts who all came to the same conclusion. Russell was beaten and possibly finished off with a vehicle to stage an accident. Despite this, the Spokane Police Department refused to reopen the case. In 1996, a new witness came forward. He claimed to have overheard one of the Foster brothers from the park confess. "I hit him once, backed up, and ran him over." Other witnesses also said that the same teen had boasted about Russell's death, even going so far as to threaten others into silence. But prosecutors declined to act, citing a lack of physical evidence. In a cruel twist, any chance of retesting the blood evidence was lost. The street had been washed down before DNA testing was performed. Both of Russell's parents died heartbroken, his father in 1998, his mother in 2011. But his sister Diana continues to fight for answers, keeping his story alive through every interview, podcast, and post. Over 30 years later, someone out there knows what really happened on that street. Was Russell targeted by the same teens he encountered in the park? Was he ambushed while walking home? Did Brian witness something he's been too scared to admit? One thing is clear. This was not a simple accident. How you can help? If you know anything about the death of Russell Evans, contact the Spokane Police Department Cold Case Unit at 625-4100.